Here are some tips to finding a great brush for your paint program, no matter what paint program you're using. There can be lots of brushes that have really interesting effects, but the question is, what are you going to use the brush for? Shading is typically the most difficult operation to do in digital painting, so that's a good one that I'm going to focus on here. If you can do that, then finding an ink pen or a sketch pencil is pretty easy. So as you think about shading, the first thing that you need to think about is, are you going to shade on top of the color? In other words, you want the colors to mix, or are you going to shade on a layer above the base layer? Here, my layer 5 is a transparent layer, and so the way that the pens or brushes will work will differ depending upon whether you're trying to mix with an existing color or you're painting on top. If you're not sure which approach you want to use in general, it's good to start with painting directly on top of an existing layer, or rather mixing the paints. Because if you have a brush that does well there, it probably also will do well when you paint on top of with a transparency layer. Now, the first trick is, as you can see, this says layer 2 copy. I've already made a copy of this layer, so I don't accidentally mess it up. If I do, I can just go back to the original layer and copy it. But usually what I'm going to do is some painting and then Control-Z to undo. Now, since I'm trying to shade a cylinder here, I may actually want to make sure that I don't go outside of the bounds. Not that it matters as I'm playing, but there's usually in your paint program something called a magic wand. And with the magic wand, once you learn that tool, you can simply click on the area of interest, and now when you paint, it will be limited to the area that has been selected. The next thing that I'm going to do is make sure that I've got my color that I want to paint with set properly. The way that I did that is I use the eyedropper tool, or in most paint programs you can press Alt and you select the color. So my current color is the same color as the cylinder itself, and so now I'm going to make this a little bit darker, and so that's the color that I'm going to paint with. Now notice up in here I have a history that I could select from. But now that I've got my paint color selected, select a brush. Now sometimes the name of the brush is not what you think it would do. So here I've got watery. I'm going to change the brush size however I want. And now I'm going to try to apply that here. Now that looks good there, but let's try to shade and see how that works. So I can get some kind of effect, and if that's what I want, okay, well that's the brush that I might want to keep. Now, if you've looked at other brush tutorials, there's ways that I can blend this better. Typically what you might see is a painter selecting Alt, selecting a color, painting on top, picking and painting, and they continue to select the color and paint on top, select the color, paint on top, and things like that. And that's a great technique, but what we're looking for is a brush that just out of the box, just using it straight, it comes as close as we can to what we're interested in. And so the question is it easy for me to shade this cylinder without doing any fancy techniques? And the watery brush just doesn't do it for me. So now all I do is press Control-Z, or whatever your undo key is, until I get back to my base cylinder again and try a new brush. Make sure that I've got my color that I want to shade with selected, the darker color. And here I am, I'm going to try that one and see how that does. Oh, wow, that's a much easier, nicer look. I kind of like that one. So there we go. We've got Blurred Edge Watercolor. It is a really good brush for that technique. And so all you do is go through all the different brushes and try that. Now you may want to Control-Z and try that same brush or the other brushes on the transparent layer, the layer on top of your base colors, and see if it still works as nicely for that style. And in this case, I think it does pretty well. Doesn't do as well as it does painting directly on that layer, but it works pretty well. So you may find some brushes are better for painting directly with the color and some better painting on top. Now, of course, you don't have to paint a cylinder. You can just fill an area with a particular color and paint on top of that. Here I'm going to use a yellow color and just see what it looks like if I paint directly on another color. So those are some easy steps to finding a paintbrush that you're interested in, and the key here is to try it out in the mixing of colors, because that's actually how you're going to use it, as opposed to just painting directly on a transparent layer, which is what most people tend to start out with. So I hope that's helpful.